Welcome back to another Property Party podcast. Today we have the wonderful Joe Parish. Joe, thank you very much for joining us.
Dude, an absolute pleasure to be here. Gentlemen, thank you for having me. I'm excited for this.
No worries at all, my man. How's your week been?
Mate, week's been good. I've just come back from Ibiza. Was speaking at an event, which was amazing, and also a fantastic excuse for a holiday. I was supposed to be going solo, and Leanne was like, "You going to Ibiza to speak at an event?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, can I? I'm coming." I was like, "All right, sound." So we made a week of it, which is brilliant. So, so good. 50 coaches in the room. Got the opportunity to spend some great time with them. Thoroughly enjoyable, and back into the rhythm routine, and now up to Costadale, Aberdeen. So
Hey, you've just missed all the Costadale song, mate. It's dropped down from the 20s now.
Yeah, down to 3.
It was absolutely freezing this morning.
Yeah, it was cool.
It was absolutely freezing.
But no, for the listeners, obviously slightly different. Slightly away from property, but not fully away from property. So yeah, we're keen to get a little behind the scenes of who Joe is, what makes you tick. Obviously quite a heavy online presence with your own coaching business, and yeah, we want to peel some layers back, mate. So why don't we go back to early days for you, mate? How did you find your early days maybe conditioned you to where and what you do now?
I think, mate, obviously you can always explore like how far do you now really want to go back. I think the thing that kind of really shaped and molded me, I think probably more so than anything else, was my desire and love for football, and basically every single day I would be kicking a ball against a wall, or I'd be kind of out at the park after dark, and it would be my mum that would be like dragging me in, and my aspiration was I actually wanted to be Alan Smith. Remember Alan Smith, Leeds United?
Yeah.
Oh mate, what a player! I had the haircut, mate, everything,
Bleach blonde.
Oh, unbelievable. So I basically just wanted to be a professional footballer. That was like pretty much my dream. And at the age of 16, got the opportunity to leave home, got a full-time contract at Torquay United. Played there for 2 years, but I spent more time in the gym than I actually did on the pitch. And I'll never forget the day. There was a right winger who ended up actually going and playing for Middlesbrough in the Championship. And we were playing as a youth team against the first team. And this guy turned me into a pretzel for about 2 hours. And I remember our manager at the time was like, "Parish." I was like, "What?" He's like, "You've got the turning circle of a milk float." He's like, you need to get yourself out of the gym, and you need to spend some more time actually just being able to develop yourself as a footballer. And yeah, after 2 years, obviously didn't get a professional contract and the opportunity to continue on, but got the perfect opportunity to then be able to kind of move to Scotland. But I think, yeah, really for me, it was always just the commitment that I had to wanting to be a professional footballer, and I was never really a normal child, if that makes sense. It was like I was always so disciplined. Like everyone would be going out on a Friday night when you're 14 years old and drinking Smirnoff Ice and doing whatever else, and I would be like, "Right, I've got training tomorrow morning," so I'd literally be in bed. I'd be home on time, and yeah, I was just like, almost felt like a bit of an outlier because the way in which I behaved was quite abnormal, but I was also at the same time okay with that at the same time. So yeah, I think it was probably more the sporting side of things that's probably made me like who I am, and it's given me that discipline and that kind of like desire and drive, I suppose, to continue to like be the very best I can possibly be. So I think, yeah, probably the footballing component is probably the thing that's been the catalyst that's driven me.
Mm-hmm. And the weirdness, I guess you mentioned there, in terms of being different and having that discipline at that age. How did that affect friendships around you? And if you was to go back to a friend that you're maybe still in touch with these days from that time period of being, 14 to 18-year-old, when you're usually experimenting, or most kids would be experimenting and boys would be, how would some of those mates describe you?
I think I never just really fit. If I look back now and I reflect and I now think about why I do what I do and why I built what I built and why I've created what I have, it's because like I never really felt as though that I ever kind of like fitted in per se into like any type of like social group. I was always okay because you were like the sporty guy and the football guy. And so you almost kind of like just, I suppose, like fitted in and had friends because you were in that kind of room. But when I look at like school and stuff like that, yeah, it was like, I still remember now, it's like I would make my lunch and like I'd have like my chicken sandwich, and then I'd just have like everyone have their snacks would be having Mars bars, and I'd have a carrot. I just have like a whole carrot that I just literally used to, at break time, everyone else is like bringing in a Mars bar, I'd be literally just gnawing on a carrot like a rabbit. And it was just like, I was like, I'm just a strange individual. Anyway, I think, yeah, for me, it was just like, I just was okay with that because I was always like continually wanting to better myself, and you'd have a few people that would obviously want to be a part of that, but also at the same time, like I kind of got not like bullied, but just never really, I don't really think I really felt connected to people. And that obviously led to me feeling quite like isolated, obviously, in that domain. I think then as well, for me, I used my sporting abilities and like being this person that maybe scores goals or scores tries or does whatever, as like, that's how I validated myself, because that's where I was getting validation from others. And I was like Joe the footballer, or Joe the sports guy, or Joe the athlete. So like everything that I was doing was like, I need to prove myself, because I felt as though that was like how the world was then judging me, and or I was then being liked. And so I suppose that I've probably then wrapped so much of like my self-worth and my identity in like having to be that person that was achieving or was doing great things or was, you know, testing himself physically, because that was my way of seeing, well, okay, I'm getting feedback and people are telling me how good I am or great I am or insert whatever. And I think that's probably been an underlying theme that also has then kind of led into my 20s as well.
That's really, really interesting. Obviously, knowing what you're like now, but where did that dedication come from way back then? Obviously, it's stuck right through, but like, where is there like a point in time where you realise that, wow, I am really different here?
Man, I think it's a good question. You know what? We went to an event not too long ago in Manchester, and I was sat with a guy in the car, and we were talking about like, why are you the way in which you are?
Yeah.
And it's like that nature nurture, and it's like, right, okay, well, what? Like, but why do I behave the way in which I behave? Like, why am I the way in which I am? Like, why are you the way in which you are? Like, what now shapes and molds that? And how can you have two people that maybe have exactly the same like upbringing, but then go in completely the different kind of like opposite directions? And how one person can look at a certain situation and be like, that's what I'm going to step into, and actually, do you know what? Everything that I see in this, I don't want to be. Where the other person would then be like, well, that's my situation and my circumstance, so that's pretty much what it's going to be for me. So I just find that such an interesting question, and it's like there's so many layers to that. I think a couple of things would be the upbringing I had with regards to my parents got separated, and then my stepdad basically was a kind of huge driver for so much of like what I did with sport and also like discipline. So it was like basically was like, I wouldn't say we were like old school, but was like very like very kind of like disciplined. It was like, you have to be home at this time, you have to do you know what I mean? It was very much like teaching me these life skills. And so I think obviously that was probably a huge component. Another one was like my granddad, probably the biggest influence on my life and the biggest kind of like role model for me. And obviously just like more the things that they kind of like taught, if that, you know, in terms of like who you now need to be and how you need to behave, and like how you now need to be able to show up, and it's controlling what you can control and the effort and the work that you now put in that's going to ultimately reap the rewards, and like nothing is a given. So I think it's probably more like the figures that I had obviously around me that I think shaped and molded so much of like my behavior. And then I suppose it's probably just been then driven through probably more, like I say, a degree of like insufficiency, or feeling as though that you almost like had to prove at that kind of like age. And actually I've just now had an aha moment. When I was 10, I played in the Centre of Excellence, and they used to get a report card. And at the end of the season, you basically either got accepted into the next year. It was basically like the best footballers in the region. You've got accepted into the next year, and it was like dribbling, shooting, passing, fitness, agility, heading. I can't remember if there's another. And it would be like A, B, C, D. And if you got more than 3 C's, you basically had to retrial, and you had to like go back to the trial to go again the next year. And on one of my scorecards, this is now giving me the this is it. Thinking as you talk. Yeah. On one of my scorecards, it basically had like 4 C's, and in like yellow highlighted marker, it basically says Joe needs to lose weight, Joe needs to get fit, Joe needs to go on a diet. At the age of 10, actually, I have 10 or 11. I think it was under 11s, and I've still got it in my at the house. I actually took a photo of it not too long ago, and I still remember the guy. I won't say the guy's name, but it's like that for me. I remember getting that report card, and that was the moment that I then became obsessed with taking my carrots to in my pack lunchbox. You know,
a horse.
Yeah, and it was the one of probably I think I remember the emotion, but it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me in that way, because that gave me such a driving force and to start like really like I wasn't looking after my, you know, I was 10 years old.
It was a massive catalyst.
Yeah, but it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, that I probably wouldn't be here right now if that didn't happen. So that was a massive driver.
You learned something
for me.
about yourself.
There we go.
Yeah. Interesting on that. I'm going off topic here, but I'm wanting to jump on it. You talk a lot within the coaching space about how you can either run from something or run towards something in terms of past experience or towards your future vision. So that experience sounds like it was a catalyst for you to go, right, I'm going to prove them wrong, probably to yourself more than anything. But do you find now, obviously a lot of years later, that you have still a bit of both aspects? You've got the vision of where you want to go personally and in your business, but you've also got that reminder previously that I don't want to go back there. Do you find that drives you to this day?
I think you're always running away from something. I think it's basically just a percentage. It's like, what am I now running towards? What am I running away from? And I think when you look at the running away from, I think there's always going to be that needs to be there. I think you need to have that fear. But then also at the same time, you can't just rely on that, because if you're always looking at that, then it's almost like you're constantly operating from scarcity. You're always constantly operating from like uncertainty. And also the catalysts, which are basically just now forcing you to do more, be more, achieve more. You're not enough. And it's almost like you're kind of like growing through pain rather than actually just looking at, right, okay, how am I now starting to grow through like pleasure and abundance and growth? Because they're two completely different kind of levers that you need to pull. But I think it's about just understanding like, right, okay, like how can I now use both to my advantage? And I think they talk about, I think it's Peterson that originally spoke about it, where they talked about how they did a study with the rat with the cheese, and how they basically put a bit of cheese in front of a rat, and they obviously tested how much he was, the rat was then pulling, and then they put the cat behind the rat and then also the cheese, and the cat behind the rat increased obviously the pull and the desire of the rat significantly more than the desire of the cheese. So again, it's like, what are you now running away from? And I think it's just using that. And I think we all have, I'll speak for myself, like I always have things that I'm running away from and things that I'm afraid of that I think drive me, and I don't think that ever leaves you. I just think it's you learn how to raise awareness around it and control it and understand where that's now coming from. But then also for you to now be able to recognize and realize what I'm actually working towards from a growth perspective and abundance perspective, and how does that now align to your values, and how does that drive behavior as well.
So good. So good.
Yep.
Quiet in the corner.
I feel like I've got my back. I feel like I've got my back, Charlie.
You're absolutely fine.
I should have sat there.
You love it. It's given me a lot. I've got so many questions. One thing that sort of stuck out was a wee topic. My question was going to be: is do you think that's a healthy thing for a 10-year-old to hear? Now I get it's not every 10-year-old. It's a group of elite footballing 10-year-olds that are hearing that sort of thing on a scorecard. Because I've got two thoughts on it. One is I'm not sure if a 10-year-old should be hearing that they need to go on a diet, but then at the same time, it was the catalyst that made you do stuff. So, and you wouldn't be quite where you are today. And the other thing that I was thinking was, on a business side, like business can feel quite lonely or isolating. But you mentioned your friendship groups, and my question was going to be is, have you found it easier because of the way you were brought up and the sort of friendship groups that you maybe kind of had but weren't fully in? Have you found it not easier, but it's all relative, isn't it? But like easier within business because you don't need that feedback from other people
I think
to make decisions and thrive.
100%. To go to the report card thing, I think obviously this was like early 2000s. So I think obviously completely different. I think we're in a completely different time now as well in terms of like the way in which people now kind of like communicate. And obviously I think the awareness around like health, nutrition, and obviously I think that's obviously, I think we're in a completely different space. I think if I had received that report card as a 10-year-old now, I think it'd be completely different in comparison to like back then. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
So I think obviously it was probably just, how do I sound like old, but it's like almost like a bit of a different time. And do I think it was healthy? Like, no, but also do I see the benefit within it now for me? Yes.
If it was your child,
I think
what would you think?
I think as always, like I think it's about the understanding of like communication more so than anything else. You know, I think, you know, if you look at something on a piece of paper and it says something, well, fundamentally, you now know based upon like your values, your beliefs, and how you now see the world, you're now going to interpret that. We all see every conversation or interaction that we're now having in a completely different way. So the way in which I interpret a conversation and the things that I pick up on are going to be completely different to you boys. So I think as always, it's always about like the person and the coaching, the communication, and actually how that's delivered rather than actually like what's delivered is of course important, but I think it's how it's delivered and communicated. So would I now be happy if that was now delivered in that manner? No. But if there was an opportunity to now be able to provide feedback in a way that would actually now be developmental and positive for somebody's development and progress, could it now be articulated and communicated in a way that was now going to be received in alignment and fed back in a way that could be deemed more positive? Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think it's the language that you use and how you communicate that's obviously the most important thing. So would I now have valued it being delivered in a different way? I suspect so. And if I was delivering like feedback, would I now be thinking about, right, okay, the person, would I be thinking about, right, okay, what and how would I now want to deliver that? And how could I also communicate that in a way that would obviously not be as direct? And you could almost now like probably be a little bit more subtle in that approach.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
I'm gonna tug on one more string on that whole piece there. If it wasn't delivered to you like that back then, do you think it would have had as much of an impact as it had?
Probably. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like probably.
Do you know what I mean?
Know,
like,
yeah.
has the whole world gone soft nowadays, where you don't get that sort of mentality taught at you at an early age and that dedication and discipline? That there's not as much of that maybe nowadays because people don't deliver things as realistic as that. Although it's brutal.
I just think there's so many platforms now for so many more voices to put out their opinion on it. So someone's child definitely got told that they needed to lose weight and go on a diet and went mental about it and weren't happy about it.
Where are they now?
Probably complained. What's that?
Where are they now?
No, of course. But the point is they didn't have a social media platform where they could complain about it on.
Yeah.
Whereas now, that is the case. Yeah. So your mum or dad may not have actually been happy about it at the time, but no one probably found out about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Irrespective of how you received it, it was all sort of isolated.
You can't kind of tell anybody about it. Yeah.
And I guess it's one of those things, like if you want to be a professional footballer, you need to be a certain standard at a certain age.
Yeah.
And if you're too big to get around the park, then that's a factor. Like, I don't think it's kind of black and white, isn't it?
Is that why you played rugby?
I played it wasn't so much the way, it was the skill set.
I think it comes back down to, just comes back down to communication. Yeah. You know, I think it's just communication, and obviously now understanding, right, okay, how can I now communicate it in a way that I now know comes from a place of like trust, inspire, care, compassion and empathy, but also in a way that I suppose is going to maybe connect to the outcome that you're looking to accomplish and achieve. So again, like, it wasn't like Joe needs to go on a diet. It was probably like, right, okay, how can we now improve Joe's fitness or agility, or what can we now do that's going to potentially give you the opportunity to now come back in a better place, rather than being as direct. You know, it's like, right, okay, how can we now ensure? And again, that's, I mean, it was like, for me, I looked at that and I was like, right, I'm going to take action, and this is now what I'm going to do, and these are the things that I'm now going to put in place. And that did change me. And did that now create a negative relationship for me and myself? And has that probably then led to like me now looking at myself, obviously through the physical and the aesthetic for a period of time in a bit of a, I suppose, like distorted way? Yeah, probably. You know, but also I will look back on that in hindsight with appreciation and gratitude, because actually also it shaped and molded how and why and part of what I now do. And that was the driving force behind me becoming far more focused on like my health and fitness and everything else. I think, yeah, communication is key. Would I now interpret and say that to somebody else? No. But I think different people communicate in different ways, and
yeah. I want to go back a little bit. So there's obviously this pivotal moment at 10 years old. We're talking about the scorecard there. There was then the professional contract at 16, and then I presume the release at 18. That was probably, I guess, a bigger kick in the nuts at 18 than the scorecard at 10, I would assume, because your identity, your passion, everything visualizing going forward was probably footballer. How did that affect you mentally, and how did that maybe open up other doors to university, or what was the transition between the full-time footballer thing to, obviously there's the gap in the middle before Joe, the high performance coach? How did that time period go?
I think, mate, when I basically moved into full-time football, I traded fun and passion for stress and pressure. And it was this thing that I used to do 7 days a week. And with every single waking minute of every single waking moment, I'd be trying to play football in some capacity. And then actually when I started to play full-time football, I almost went from I've got nothing to lose and I'm just going to play with this freedom and this enjoyment and this love and this hobby to now, right, okay, I'm a somebody, and I've gone from nothing to a something in my mind. And now like I just filled myself with all this like self-applied pressure, this expectation. And I then basically went from something that I loved to something that I felt as though was almost like crushing me because I felt such a degree of pressure and expectation to perform and work at such a, perform to such a level every single Saturday. And if I didn't, then I was letting people down. The reality is nobody ever told me that. That was just my own self-applied pressure that I put on myself. And I almost started to fall out of love with football over that kind of like 2-year period. And for me, when I got released, I knew that I was going to get released. I knew in my heart of hearts that I wasn't going to get a contract. And there's part of me that was, of course, disappointed and more so than anything else felt as though that I let my parents down. Because they'd pretty much sacrificed and compromised so much. Obviously, family traveled me around like the entirety of the country to trial and do all these different things. So I felt initially more like I'd let them down than I had anything else. They didn't care. They just wanted me to be happy and be okay. And just now know that this was actually going to probably give me the stepping stone into what was next. It was just my inner dialogue and inner chatter, probably more so than anything else that I felt, which was probably the harder thing. But when I knew that I was getting released, I kind of had known that for a few months anyway. Did I know what was next? No, I basically went and worked in Tesco's for 2 months and basically waited until I was going to go to exit trials to then see whether I could get another contract and then see what was going to happen. But it definitely was a bit of a shift because I suppose you go from being, again, Joe the footballer, Joe the guy that moved away at a young age, Joe that captained the football team and did everything else, to now being like, right, okay, Joe's now the guy that works behind the tills in Tesco's, and that dream that I had of being a professional footballer is kind of no more. And then it's like, right, okay, now what? Now where am I going to go? Now what am I going to do? Because I never thought that I would do anything else other than play football, you know?
Mm-hmm. What did you do?
So I ended up getting a scholarship to university and then kind of moved away. Played for about a month, spent more time in the gym than I actually did on the football pitch. Ended up then getting a job in the gym and then pretty much just developed my journey from there. I then became obsessed with coaching, became obsessed with developing myself. I was in a phenomenal environment. I got the opportunity just to coach every single type of individual, from like elite level athletes all the way then through to, like, I never forget the most nerve-wracking session that I ever delivered. It was called 50 plus stretch and tone. It wasn't 50 plus, it was more like 70 plus. And it would be like, I used to joke, it'd be like that Betty and Barbara and co would come along. And I never forget the day I got the call up, like, Joe, you're gonna have to deliver this fitness class today, and it's basically 50 plus stretch and tone. They have this music that they like to play, and they've got the pink bands and the pink dumbbells, and it's in the studio. I can still remember I was so nervous. Because A, I hate dancing. And then obviously I knew that I was going to have to play like this. I can't even remember like what year of music it was. But I then had, and basically it was obviously these fantastic ladies. They were beautiful human beings. And there was like 6 or 7 of them, I remember, in a semicircle. And then there's me, and we're dancing to this song. And then doing like curls of like these pink bands and like these dumbbells or whatever. It was the toughest crowd that I've had to face. And then before I finished, my granddaughter would really like you. My granddaughter would really like you. So yeah, that was so I had the opportunity to work with so many people. I delivered personal training courses, strength conditioning courses. I learned from some of the very best sports scientists in the world. And I just became obsessed then with developing like myself, like physically and aesthetically. And then obviously stepped into like the physique world, and that was kind of the next ascension of my journey. But yeah, I just became like this guy who just fell in love with coaching and like coaching like physique more so than anything else, but actually just coaching people through positive change. And that was kind of like the real catalyst. It was almost like what I did when I was at Torquay and what I loved doing in my spare time. And I always used to go to the gym every single evening. I just used to think, if I could just do this every single day instead of having to play football, it's like, I'd be happy. And it's like crazy, because it's like all I ever wanted to do was be a footballer. And it's like, but then I started to resent and not enjoy that anymore because of the pressure I was putting myself under. Yeah. I think that was more of like an escape for me more so than anything else.
Yeah. So would you say that's one of the things still to this day that obviously fills your cup in terms of what fuels Joe and what your kind of day-to-day regimen?
Yeah, I think you fundamentally, the first mountain you always have to climb is your own mountain. You know, I think you have to now look at, right, okay, how am I now developing myself? Because I am always going to be limited to the impact that I can now have based upon how much I serve myself, look after myself, and now lead myself. And I think you can only ever take others as far as you've now taken yourself. And the first person that you need to like look after and serve and lead is, of course, you. And I think there's a live it and there's a learn it. You've got to now be able to live it and embody it and basically ensure that you're now leading and looking after and developing oneself. And then there's also the learn it consideration, whereby you can't just then teach somebody what you've done because they're not you. So you've got to now be able to live it, because you've got to have the empathy, the compassion, the understanding, and also the aspiration of like, this is what I've done. But then you've also got to have the learn it of, right, okay, how do I now develop my coaching skill, my education, my acumen, so that I can now not just look at it, what I've done, I'm just going to give to you, but I've then got like obviously this bird's eye view, and obviously I've got this scope of practice, which can now allow me the opportunity to understand how can I now coach to allow them to facilitate their own progress and get the best out of themselves, without placing my expectation of what I've done on them, if that makes sense. So I think you've always got to be able to ensure that you are looking after you and get the best out of you in order for you to then be able to get the best out of others.
100%.
There was that you came up actually and spoke at one of the events that James had put on. I think it was last year,
February, mate.
and you spoke about how
February, Christ.
was it February?
Yeah.
Oh, so it was this year.
Mental.
This year, mate.
February this year.
Was it
Yeah,
this year? Oh,
February,
funny, felt like ages ago. You spoke about you got started coaching, and then you got to a point and you were making good money. And I remember it resonated with me. Not the making good money bit, but the getting started and getting to a point that you thought would be almost like you've made it or feeling accomplished, and you said you weren't, and then you sort of took a step back and did something else, and then you felt like you were really thriving. So what does that look like?
I think for me, it was like, what was I chasing? And initially, obviously, what I was chasing was like, I just need to get to X, or I need to get to Y, or I need to get to Z, because I felt as though that I needed to feel safe myself. I think I needed something to prove. And it's like, if I can just get to, it's like us, like you're probably in the property side, it might be like, we just need to get to this level of properties. And then when we get here, then we can. Mm-hmm. And then all of your focus just goes into, right, okay, I just need to get to this level. And then what ends up happening is almost you start to sacrifice and compromise, and you're just chasing this thing that then just continues to get further away. And then what happens is when it goes well or doesn't go so well, your self-worth, your energy, how you see yourself and everything else, then basically ends up going up and down like a roller coaster, because you're now being influenced by the external instead of now actually the internal. So I was just chasing, right, okay, I now have, like, you know, my stepdad, when I was about to graduate, was like, when are you going to get a real job? And then again, it was that thing. It's like, right, like, this is different. This isn't, I didn't know anybody else that was running an online coaching business at the time. And so again, it was like, right, I've got to fucking prove myself here, you know, and like, I'm going to use almost like that fuck you energy as like a desire to now be able to go and like push on. But then obviously that got to a point where it was like, you're chasing the next thing and chasing the next thing and chasing the next thing. And then you almost like lose the reason that you started doing this in the first place. Because again, it's almost like, I talk about that, the football. It was like fun and passion, then went to stress and pressure. Mm-hmm. I started coaching because I just loved it. And I would just coach for free, and I would go into the gym and I'd spend all day on the gym floor. And I never forget the day, Ryan, I lived with Quinny for, he came in and spoke with you guys. And I lived with him for a summer, and he was basically doing football camps. And I'd gone to the library and I'd taken out a load of nutrition books. And he came home one day, and I'm sat on the living room floor, like reading these nutrition books. And he opened the door and he's like, what the fuck are you doing? I was like, mate, I'm reading a nutrition book. He's like, mate, what are you doing? He's like, what are you doing that for? He's like, mate, it's like the summer holiday or whatever. He's like, I was like, mate, like, and he was just like, and it was like, we laugh and joke about it now. And he said that from like a place of love. It's like, you know, it's like, I remember him saying to me, like, you've got to make something out of this thing, because like, you're so good at it. And like, obviously you're so passionate about it. It's like, you've got to make this a thing. So that was like that fun and passion that I started with. And then all of a sudden it just translated into this like stress and pressure. Yeah. And then I almost like lost that fun and passion. And so I think for me, it was exactly the same as the football, fun and passion to stress and pressure. It was the same with like the business. It was like, right, started off as a hobby, and it was for fun and passion, and then moved into stress and pressure. And it's like, you then lose like why you're doing it in the first place. And then actually you're measuring your self-worth and your success based upon actual like numbers and or metrics, but actually you don't focus on the impact, the connections, the things that you're doing, and everything else. And I think you just then get caught up in this rat race of more, instead of actually now focus on what do I have, where am I, what am I doing all this for, and where is the love and the passion, the fulfillment and the enjoyment in this, rather than just chasing the next insert whatever target that's now going to be. So I think that was my big realization, because I kept on chasing, and then you get there and you almost feel worse about yourself.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what have I had to compromise or sacrifice in order for me to be able to get there? And then there's not a fucking parade or a marching band or anybody that tells you how amazing you are. It's just literally you get there and you're like, right, okay, now what? And then, right, okay, next goal. And you just think bigger and bigger and bigger instead of actually now thinking about.
Yes. So what does that look like now? I know this probably seems like a probing question, but like there's always like key elements of your business that allow you to feel like you're thriving and not go back to the stress and pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it fun. What are they? How does that look day to day for you in terms of like keeping it like that?
Well, I still think there's still definitely a lot of stress and pressure. But I think it's obviously like extremity expands capacity. So I think like the greatest lessons have to be experienced in order for them to be fully understood. So like I had to find my edge. I think like I was the guy that basically measure my self-worth and success based upon the way in which I looked, and then in doing so I completely compromised and sacrificed like my business. I was then the guy that was like, right, okay, I need to double down, I need to absolutely prioritize my business, and I need to now make sure that this is going to become a thing, that I basically sacrificed and compromised myself and gave absolutely everything to everybody else, and then as a byproduct ended up burnt out, in hospital, fatigued, and then spending 8 weeks in bed as a byproduct off the back of it. And I was like, okay, fuck that up as well. And then it was like, right, okay, I'm going to start looking after myself, and then I'm going to start looking after the business. And then I came home one day, and then Leanne does this thing where she, like, if she's annoyed at me, she just doesn't, like, we don't argue, she just doesn't talk to me. Like, just, how are you? Yeah, fine.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And so and so I was like, fuck, what have I done wrong? And then again, I don't forget, I can remember I was at the time in such a phase of like just trying to build and grow and develop. And in my head, I'm like, I'm doing this for us. I'm doing this for our future. I'm doing this for our family. I'm doing this so that we can have this life and we can have these experiences. And if we now have a family, then we can provide them with A, B, C, and D. And like, this is all the reason I'm doing this stuff. And in her head, she just wanted me to be a normal human being and sit and watch TV with her and go for a walk or go for lunch and actually just not be like that Carlsberg advert where they're having a conversation and I'm just like somewhere else. And she came in and it was like, you know, you love your business far more than you love spending time with me. And I'm like, in my head, I'm going, yeah, but I'm doing this for us. But she obviously didn't really, what she wanted was to be Joe, you know? And so that was the realization. It was like, right, fucking hell, I'm compromising and sacrificing now my relationship because I'm working towards this thing. And if I can just get to this thing, then I can. And then it was realizing, right, okay, do you know what? Like, I now need to build and understand, like, what do I value? What's now important to me? What am I willing to sacrifice, compromise, and regret? And what am I not willing to sacrifice, compromise, and regret? And then how do I manage, obviously, the push and the pulls and the seasons that I'm now in? And what's the priority for me? And so I think that's really where then I obviously stepped into the coach's coach, which is understanding, right, okay, you're self-employed, you're trying to look after yourself, you're trying to like serve your people, you're trying to then run a business and understand actually how you scale and grow a business. You can feel lonely, lost, and isolated. You've then got to obviously think about all of the kind of key pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that you need to have in place when you're trying to grow and build. And again, it can be quite a lonely and isolating place. And so I realized, it can't just be me that feels like this. And I've done that thing, messed up, did that thing, messed up, and did another thing and then messed up. So I was like, how now do I build a system? So for me, it's now looking at my life and going, right, okay, what do I enjoy? What do I love? What do I want to see more of in the world? But then also, like, how do I now do it in a way that obviously feels aligned and connected to me? So I actually now enjoy this stuff, because if I now enjoy what I'm doing, then fundamentally there's going to be more passion, which means I'm going to probably work harder. And that's actually going to give me more energy as a byproduct. Instead of just now thinking, right, okay, if I can just get to this, or I just get to this, or I can just get to this. So I think for me, it's just finding the enjoyment in the daily, and also being okay with knowing that there's always going to be uncertainty, there's always going to be pain, and there's always going to be constant work. And it doesn't matter whether you get 1 property, 5 properties, 10 properties, you get a development or insert whatever, you know, there's always going to be uncertainty, pain, and constant work. So it's not trying to get away from that. It's just trying to learn how can I manage those things and build systems so that I can actually now bounce back quicker within those. And I think that's probably been the biggest thing for me, was just learning how I can start to do that rather than just like trying to run away from something all the time.
So good. Obviously, you're a mentor and a coach now for quite a lot of people, and I imagine you're quite impactful within their life. But who's been an impactful coach or mentor for you, past, previous, present?
Yeah, because your self-awareness is through the roof. Yeah, I just wanted to add that in there. When you're talking, it's clearly you've done a lot of work, self-reflection. As that self-reflection came naturally to you, or has that element of having your own coaches and mentors opened your eyes to, maybe having that assessment on yourself and finding your values and your purpose a lot more easier than maybe it was just pushing through the shit all the time? Sorry to jump in.
No. You added perfectly to that.
Yeah, no, I think, and again, I this might be a bit of a cop-out answer, but I feel as though that I learn from every single person that I have the opportunity to kind of interact and connect with. And I think that regardless of the room that you put yourself in, everybody has an incredible story and everybody has something of value that you can now take in not a negative way, but in a positive way.
Yeah.
And I think in doing so, what that allows you to do is realize that there's an opportunity to learn within every single conversation or interaction that you now have. And for me, I love the thought process of trait jacking. So what are the things that I now love about this person? Okay, why do I now love those things about that person? Right, okay, what are they currently doing? There's a bright spot that I could now potentially trait jack myself and then make my own and in my own unique way. So I think for me, it's actually just understanding that there's opportunity everywhere, and it's not necessarily one person. I could say probably the biggest and greatest coach to me has been my granddad or my parents, probably more so than anything else. But it's also been my friends. It's also been the people that I've had the opportunity to work alongside. It's been some of the mentors that I've worked with. It's been the football managers that I used to kind of get coached under. And I think there's an opportunity to learn all the time. And it's just that curiosity of how can I use this to make me better? And also similarly, it's you go into a room and you now know that you don't connect. You maybe see somebody and you look at the things that you now don't want to be, but then that just raises a more awareness as well, because it allows you the opportunity to understand, well, this is what I value and this is what I see, and also these are the bits that don't really connect with me. So actually, do you know what? I'm going to do a little bit less of that, and that's not what I want to do, and that's not how I want to behave or how I want to interact. And I think one of my things is even if we're at a wedding or anything, it's if I sit next to somebody, it's I strive as much as possible. I realize I'm talking a lot today. But it's how can you now be as interested as possible? And I'll even challenge myself. So even if I now know that we've got absolutely nothing in common, one of the biggest things that I'll then do is I'm right, okay, I'm going to learn from this. So I'm going to then think about, right, okay, what am I listening to? What am I hearing? What is it they're actually saying? And then how can I now just clarify, confirm that they've been understood? And then how can I reflect questions back to them so that what can be an awkward situation or quite a challenging situation, or maybe an introverted person, or maybe somebody that doesn't really feel as though, how can I now actually almost use that scenario for me? They don't know that I'm developing myself, but I'm actually developing myself in that situation, because I'm thinking, how is this making me better? Right, okay, there's this silence, or they're not really giving me much. So right, okay, how can I now start to, navigate through, and what can I now potentially do? So I'm just constantly trying to develop and learn myself in every single situation, experience and circumstance, and just be open more so than anything. So
that's not a cop-out answer whatsoever.
But I think that's it. It's not.
So good.
So I think it's everybody that you get the opportunity to kind of learn from. So going back to the report card thing, it's what I now communicate that in that way is no, but right, okay, what in my head, the way in which I now think about that in hindsight is right, okay, I can appreciate that there was a degree of there was good intentions behind that message. It was probably how the message was delivered and relayed that could have in hindsight been done in a different way. And okay, I can see and understand that, and then look at, right, okay, well, moving forwards, how does that now improve my ability to now be able to communicate and how you deliver information, etc. And I think that's how I try to see as much as possible to the best of my ability. And I'm far from perfect and I fuck up all the time, but that's my thought process around trying to develop and learn. It's I think there's opportunity everywhere, even from documentaries to TV programs. I love rugby. I said to somebody the other day, I learned so much from a rugby game just by the way in which the referee manages the players, how he communicates, the way in which he now conducts himself, the language that he uses when he's direct, when he's indirect, when he's very firm, and or when he basically just does allow the game to kind of go on, and or allows a bit of chitter chat back and forth. So for me, it's there's just opportunity everywhere, and that's how I see things.
So interesting, isn't it? It's just a different perspective on everything. So I wanted to go into property now. I've deliberately turned the notes off because I think you've covered a shit ton there. Obviously, you've built up this thriving business. There's no doubt about that. And you've Sean mentioned it earlier about your impact on other people, and I can vouch for that so much over the last 12 months or so. But property's probably fair to say a little interest of yours.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that fit into all the plates that you're currently spinning and all the values that you have? Is it purely a wealth building vehicle that you see? How do you see that playing out for you? Obviously, it's a property podcast. So I'm just from another perspective, your focus is over here on the business and the coaching side of things, but there's an element of interest over here as well.
Yeah.
How does that all fit into the Joe Parish scene?
So when I was in my first year of the online coaching business, probably I have two incredibly close friends that are local. One of them is Ryan, that you guys will know. And we also have an incredible friend called Craig. When Craig was obviously 21st, he basically started his like property venture, and he, if I remember correctly, basically wanted to now be able to, like, instead of now getting a gift for his 21st, basically now wanted support to now be able to get on to like the buy-to-let ladder. And he kind of ascended very, very quickly. And myself, Ryan and Craig were on a night out, and Craig was very intoxicated, as we all were, and we got onto the topic of property, and Craig was like, you asked Ryan, he's like, that's the beauty of it. It's like you build this thing and then it just pays you forever. And then the next day, me and Ryan were hanging out of our arse. We went for lunch and we're like, Craig was talking about this stuff last night. And then we went to a property seminar. Both me and Ryan, we were at the start, obviously didn't have any property, went there, and I was like, actually felt quite inferior, because obviously people were talking about, I've got this and I've got that, and I was like, I'm gonna fuck all. I don't own anything. I actually don't even know what any of this means. And then kind of Ryan started obviously in that journey, and then obviously it was always a massive aspiration for me as a kind of vehicle that I could then start to use that would obviously now support family, most importantly. Like the biggest thing for me is obviously being able to provide and support and give back to my family. Not that they want that, but obviously I want to be able to create opportunity. I also want to be able to create future for my family. And like that's obviously the most important thing, and just provide experiences. And I saw that obviously there was an opportunity within property and playing a longer term game. And so it was more through the influence of like Craig and Ryan that started then to like build some momentum. Again, like the business being incredibly like busy, and where my passion now really lies. I don't really have a passion within property. So Ryan basically just started like sourcing property at the time. So I basically use that as a vehicle. Obviously I've now come to you guys to now use that as a vehicle, and basically just now use your expertise and just now understand that this isn't now where I want to spend my time, effort, and energy. But if there's an opportunity where I can start to build this vehicle supplementary to what it is that I'm creating without now distracting my time and my energy. And I now know that I'm playing a 20-25 year game. And I now know that for me, this is now focused very much on how can I create and provide something that's going to support my family. That was the kind of the main reason for me. I've always been interested in like finance and wealth. And obviously just now, I think more so than anything else, if I go back to like me being a child, it's like my parents gave absolutely everything to now be able to provide us with, all the things that we now fundamentally ever wanted, the sacrifices, the compromises that they made, and would buy us things probably even when they didn't have the money to, and or would then have to go out and work double shifts. And my mum was a cleaner, and like she would then basically put like pounds in the pot that I would go and obviously take every single day for your packed lunch. And I used to feel so, I still remember, I used to like this little like blue like pot that she used to basically put in a glass cupboard. And it's like, that was where our kind of like lunch money was. And I used to feel so guilty because I used to see my mum working so hard, cleaning, she was delivering parcels and like everything else. And I used to feel so bad that I was almost like taking her money. And I always just remember, I always had this massive desire and this massive drive. It was like, I always want to be in a position whereby at one point I could almost like give back and also then ensure that would never like, money and finance would never get in the way of the experiences that we could now possibly have as a family, and obviously the opportunity that then creates, and also my ability to be able to give back as well. So I think that's kind of where that has kind of almost like came from more so than anything else, a drive and a desire to, like Ed Milet talks about, like being the one, like the person who now like, and I suppose if I say actually my truth and I say it out loud and I'm authentically me, it's like, that's who I want to be,
that person,
that can actually now provide and give these experiences and these opportunities, and not just to family, but to friends, and also then to team. And, that's obviously a really valuable thing for me, because I value connection more now than anything else.
Interesting.
Lovely.
I seen you lurking
Well,
in the background there.
I've got a question, but I actually thought if that was the end of the podcast, it'd be a lovely end to it. So I don't know if I would ask it.
I might
But
ask
one of
that.
you mentioned, and it's always stuck with me, the concept of being consistently good or occasionally great.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that.
So,
That's how
It's
impactful
a good
that
way
was.
to
I
end.
still remember that.
Joe, are you consistently good or occasionally great?
If I'm going to be open and completely okay with speaking my truth, I am ruthlessly, relentlessly consistent around the basic fundamentals every single day, predominantly. Never perfect. I still fuck up, make mistakes, don't do things. But I think that's one of my. Even when I played football, I was never like a talented football player. I was never like the most skillful one. I was always the one who was just the fittest and always the one that would just outwork everybody else. Like pre-season training, I'll never forget. One day they made us do extra running after training. And because we'd done something wrong, we hadn't cleaned the boots or done something with cleaning the footballs or whatever. And I'll never forget that he actually made me sit out of the extra running because he said, like, this isn't punishment for you. This is actually enjoyable for you. So everybody else is now going to do these extra runs, but you're actually not going to do it because, like,
That's more of a punishment.
I was the guy that was like, more. Basically, I just now want to so for me, like, it has always been like I've always just, what I've lacked in kind of like talent and skill and everything else, like my mentality through obviously what my parents have really kind of distilled in me has always just been like work ethic. And I think that's the biggest and most important thing. Like for me is like, if I don't achieve or accomplish something, if I now know that I've tried my absolute very best and I've still failed and it's not worked out, I'm okay with that. And I can live with that, as hard as that feels. But if I now know that I've done something and I haven't achieved the outcome, but I just know in my heart of hearts and I know in my head that there was more that I could have done, there's more that I should have done, there's more that I had available to me, but I didn't. That's when I think you live with that almost like regret. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, like my mentality is always, it's like, okay, how can I now be better today? And how can I like outclone or outdo myself from yesterday? And like I say, there's days that I can't be bothered. Most days I can't be bothered. There's plenty of days that I don't feel inspired, motivated, and or like want to do it. But the biggest thing for me is like, I'll always be as consistent as I possibly can be to give myself the greatest opportunity to now be better. And I then focus on the trajectory that I'm on rather than the result that I'm achieving right now. And that goes back to what I said before about the stress and pressure and the fun and passion, is that how can I now allow myself the opportunity to enjoy the process and the trajectory, and I can behave my way to a feeling and behave my way to success rather than thinking, right, okay, I need to get this result or this is what I need to have. Or actually, if I don't have this right now, then I'm not enough or I'm not good enough or I'm not doing enough. It's like, right, okay, what are the behaviors that I now need to embody in alignment with that person that I now want to be? And then how do I now basically just stack that proof and stack? I love like the 2Ps, you know, like the sliding machines at the apartments I've talked about, at the arcade, sorry. And it's like, you basically put the 2P into the machine, it slides down the back, and then it like goes on one top layer and it goes on the bottom layer. They kind of go like this. And then when you accumulate enough 2Ps, you basically get a windfall at some point. It's like, I think about that like with life. It's like, you put these 2Ps into the machine so often, it's like nothing happens. And then you're in the valley of despair and you're like, fucking hell, it's like, what's the point? People are telling you to get a real job, or people are telling you it's not working, or you're telling yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I making these compromises? Why am I making these sacrifices? Like, I'm not getting anything in return. And then all of a sudden you just put that extra 2P into the machine, and then the compounding accumulative interest that you've now been putting up, all those 2Ps just start to stack on top of each other, and then bang, you get this windfall, and you get that
on
little
a
glimpse.
fucking t-shirt.
You get, brilliant. You know, you get that little glimpse, you get that windfall, and you're like, wow, I get all these 2Ps, and you end up winning about quid 32, and then you can get yourself an ice cream. But for me, it's about realizing it's always about the delayed, and that's why it's understanding, okay, what are the 2Ps that I need to put into the machine today? And I now know that some days I'll put in a load of 2Ps, and other days I'll maybe just put in one or two. But as long as I now know that I'm still just building that momentum every single day, and I'm still turning up even when I feel as though I'm getting punched in the face, and there's challenge, there's opportunity within that. And I just said to James in the car, like, the last 2 months have been incredibly challenging, like for me on a whole host of different levels. But it's like, there's times that I've broken down, there's times that I've got emotional, there's times that I've been like, fucking hell, what am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? It would just be easier if insert grass is green on the other side. And then I move the emotion through going for a walk or like having a chat with Leanne or like training or just reminding myself like why I'm doing this. And then it just makes you realize, right, okay, where's the opportunity in this? Where's the growth in this? Where's the lesson within this? Because there's something within this right now that is going to, when I look backwards and I can only connect the dots backwards, that will actually now allow those things to become the lessons and also the behaviors that now embody who I am and actually my ability to now do what I do. So I think it's just now looking at, right, okay, how is this now happening for you? And how can I see the opportunity to grow and develop through this? And how is this making me better? And so I think when you go through the seasons and cycles of challenge, it's like that is a prerequisite for success. And that is actually a sign that it's on its way. You just can't see it yet. And that's the thing that I just continue to focus on more so than anything else. Let me live within this 1 meter squared and now focus on what I can now control to the best of my ability. And as long as I now know that I've done my best, if I don't get the professional contract or I don't get this or I don't get that, it's like, I'm okay, I can live with that because I now know that in my heart of hearts, I trust myself and I back myself and I now know that I can go again. And I know that my work ethic will always be the biggest driver that keeps me kind of moving forwards through both pain, running away from something, but also then the desire of what I'm now running towards and my values and how I want to live and what's now most important to me and the impact that I now want to have. And at the talk in Ibiza, I said, my mission is simple. I just want to leave you in a slightly better place than I found you. And I spent so much of my life pretending to be somebody that I wasn't because I felt as though that I needed to fit in or I needed to conform. And I'd walk into a room and want to be liked. And I'd think, what do I need to say to be liked? Or what do I need to say to feel as though that I fit in? And for me, it was then just realizing, do you know what? People need Joe Parish exactly as he is today. People need James Duguid exactly as he is today. People need exactly as they are today. And it's just actually being okay with that. And my favorite Mark Manson quote is, you cannot be seen as a life-changing presence to some without being seen as a joke or an embarrassment to others. And I think it's just about understanding that, like, the first like mask and the very person that you now need to fundamentally just back, believe, trust, and without sounding happy clappy, like, love is you. Because if you walk into a room and you know that you feel that about yourself, it doesn't really matter what anybody else says, because you now know you've walked into that room, you've been authentically you, and that whether people like you or they don't like you, that's up to them and that's their interpretation based upon how they feel and what they think, and that's cool. Whereas if I walk into a room, which I've done so many times, thinking, how am I going to be judged? What are people going to think? What are people going to say? What are people now going to potentially now, like, whatever? I then walk away and I've got all these open loops all the time. So I think for me, it's just actually learning that I am enough, and I need to focus on what's most important to me and actually what can I now control and what are my values and how can I now live within those. And if people are aligned to those, amazing. If they're not aligned to those, then that's also absolutely okay, because we all live in these different bubbles and there's lessons and opportunity to learn from those.
How's that for an ending?
I know.
Mate, there's so many lessons there for the listeners in terms of how to approach life, how to view life with the long-term game. That came out consistently great, or consistently being a massive theme on that, and just having that thought process of development, being the best that you can. So while this is a property podcast, there's so much values in that. We talk often to our coaching clients about having that consistent effort and the 2 Ps in the machine analogy and all that good stuff. So impactful, mate. Appreciate it. And a gratitude from me to you is on the development personally for me over the last 12 months has been phenomenal. Out with business, never mind the impact it's had on business as a byproduct. But appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom today.
Appreciate you. Final point I'm going to say, when you get the person thriving, the people and profit will follow. Doesn't matter whether you're coaching, doesn't matter whether you're a mum, doesn't matter whether you're a dad, doesn't matter whether you're in the property game. Like, fundamentally, the person with the greatest amount of certainty will always win. So if you are now in the property game and you're looking to step into the property game, the biggest and most important thing you now need to have is confidence and trust within yourself, and also the ability to now be to go into a room with certainty, with confidence, and the ability to now be to back yourself, even when other people around you are maybe telling you not to do it. It's a stupid idea. Of course, audit that, listen to that, and understand that, and recognize where's that coming from. Do a due diligence, of course, but the person with the greatest amount of certainty will always win. And that now comes back to the person who's now working harder on themselves than they are now anything else. And that now doesn't mean training and going to the gym and, you know, eating well. That's a small part of it, but it's absolutely everything else. Your business development, whether that's now property or insert whatever, will never exceed your personal development. And your personal development is now doing the stuff that you're currently putting off, because that's where you build the trust and you build the confidence. You learn the greatest amount of about yourself. And that's going to be the very platform that will then allow you the opportunity to keep moving forward in the face of adversity. And when there is challenge, which will be inevitable, most importantly. So you are the most important asset. And when you get the person thriving, the people and profit follow. And if you're in the property game, people buy people.
So good.
Have a bit of that. Brilliant. Thanks for your time,
Thanks
Joe.
very much.
Really appreciate that.
Let's go and lift.
Let's go to the gym.
Thank you, boys.
Cheers.
All right, my man.
Have a lovely one.
Thank you. Appreciate you, boys.
Oh man, that was fucking awesome.